Has this ever happened to you? A profound wound, a betrayal that splintered your sense of self, yet in the aftermath, you found yourself silenced, unable to articulate the depth of your agony? The world, it seems, often expects a grand theatrical display of suffering, a public lament for private grief. But what if the deepest healing, the most profound transformation, happens not in the clamor of outward expression, but in the hushed chambers of the soul? What if, as the title whispers, the soul doesn't heal loudly? This paradox, this quiet alchemy of pain, is where true resilience is forged, often far from the observing gaze. Consider Elara, a woman whose life, to an outsider, appeared a tapestry of understated elegance and quietude. She was a librarian, a curator of stories, yet her own narrative held a chapter she kept meticulously sealed. Years prior, Elara had experienced a seismic rupture in her most cherished relationship. Not a dramatic, shouted argument, but a slow, insidious erosion of trust. A series of micro-betrayals that chipped away at the foundation of her belief in shared vulnerability. Her partner, a man of charismatic charm and subtle manipulation, had woven a web of deceit so intricate that by the time Elara fully unraveled it, she felt not rage, but a chilling emptiness. There were no public accusations, no tearful confrontations. Instead, a profound silence descended, a quiet retreat into the labyrinth of her own mind. Friends, noticing her withdrawal, offered well-meaning advice. You need to talk about it, Elara. Get it all out. Don't bottle it up. That's not healthy. Their words, though kind, felt like a foreign language, a demand for a performance she was utterly incapable of giving. She would nod, offer a weak smile, and retreat further into the quietude that had become her sanctuary. One crisp autumn afternoon, a curious incident unfolded in the hushed aisles of the library. A young boy, no older than 7, had lost his beloved teddy bear, a threadbare, one-eyed companion he clutched everywhere. His distress was palpable, a silent tremor that resonated through the usually calm space. Elara watched as his mother, flustered and apologetic, tried to coax a cry, a shout, anything, from the boy. Tell me, sweetie, where did you see it last? Don't just stand there. But the boy remained motionless, his small face contorted in a silent, heartbreaking grimace. Elara knelt beside him, her gaze meeting his, and saw not stubbornness, but a quiet, profound grief. She didn't press him for words. Instead, she simply said, "Sometimes, when things hurt a lot, it's hard to find the words, but we can still look for what's lost." She then began, systematically and gently, to search the shelves, moving through the fiction section, then biography, her fingers tracing the spines of books, a calm, steady presence. The boy, without a sound, began to follow her, his small hand instinctively reaching for the hem of her cardigan. Hours later, tucked behind a forgotten encyclopedia, Elara found the teddy bear. The boy didn't shout with joy. He simply took the bear, hugged it tight, and a single, silent tear tracked down his cheek. It was a moment of quiet revelation for Elara, a mirror reflecting her own unspoken pain. She recognized in him the unspoken anguish, the profound internal experience that defied outward expression. This quiet observation became a pivotal point in Elara's journey. She began to understand that her inability to loudly articulate her pain wasn't a flaw, but perhaps an intrinsic part of her healing process. The external pressure to talk about it had felt like an invasion, a demand to force open a wound before it was ready to breathe. Instead, she found solace in the subtle shifts within her. She started to walk in the botanical gardens, not to escape, but to observe the silent growth of plants, the quiet unfurling of blossoms. She found herself drawn to classical music, the wordless narratives of symphonies mirroring the ineffable complexity of her own emotions. She began to journal, not to craft a linear narrative of her pain, but to simply record fragments of thought, fleeting images, and unspoken feelings, the quiet dialogue with her own soul. There were moments of intense melancholy, waves of grief that would wash over her without warning, leaving her breathless. Yet, in these moments, she didn't fight them. She allowed them to be, to pass through her, like clouds across a vast, inner sky. This was her shadow work, a deep engagement with the parts of herself that had been wounded, the aspects she had perhaps, in her youthful naivety, projected onto her partner. She realized that the betrayal wasn't just about him, but about the fragile ego boundaries she had allowed to dissolve within the relationship. One evening, a former colleague, a woman named Clara, known for her sharp intellect and equally sharp tongue, encountered Elara at a small book fair. Clara, ever direct, inquired, still reeling from that debacle with Mark. Elara, you're awfully quiet about it. Are you even angry? Elara, instead of retreating, found a quiet strength within her. She met Clara's gaze and, with a calm she hadn't known she possessed, replied, anger can be a loud fire, Clara, but sometimes, healing is like a silent tide, pulling back the debris, revealing what was always underneath. Clara, momentarily disarmed by Elara's unexpected candor and serene demeanor, simply nodded, a flicker of understanding in her eyes. It was a small victory, not a dramatic confrontation, but a quiet affirmation of her chosen path. Elara didn't need to justify her silence. Her inner world was her own. She was engaged in a process of individuation, separating her true self from the wreckage of the past relationship, defining herself not by what had been done to her, but by how she chose to respond to it. Her silence was not avoidance, but a profound act of self-preservation, a fertile ground for inner growth. The noise of the world, with its incessant demands for external validation of suffering, had become a distraction. Her healing was an internal, deeply personal process, akin to a seed germinating in the darkness, quietly gathering strength before breaking through the soil. The external world saw only the surface, but beneath, a profound transformation was underway, a testament to the quiet power of the soul's own silent journey. The archetype embodied by Elara is that of the wounded healer, a figure who, through confronting and integrating their own suffering, gains the capacity to understand and perhaps even guide others through similar trials. Her journey illuminates the theme that profound healing often manifests not in explosive declarations or public displays of catharsis, but in the subtle, painstaking work of internal reconciliation. Her character, with its quiet strength and deep introspective capacity, demonstrates that emotional behavior isn't always performative. Sometimes, the most significant shifts occur in the unobserved depths of the psyche. You, watching this, might feel the familiar sting of unspoken pain, the pressure to conform to external expectations of how you should grieve or heal. But consider this, your silence, if it stems from a place of self-preservation and deep introspection, is not weakness. It is a sacred space where the soul can tend to its wounds without the clamor of external judgment. Allow yourself the grace of your own unique healing rhythm. Trust that your internal landscape, however quiet, holds the keys to your rebirth. Embrace the stillness, for it is in the quiet moments that the most profound transformations occur, allowing you to emerge not broken, but profoundly whole. Have you ever noticed how the world often demands a certain narrative of healing, a linear progression from brokenness to triumphant recovery, often punctuated by loud declarations of resilience? Yet, the quiet truth, often overlooked, is that the soul doesn't heal loudly. It often happens in the unseen chambers of internal reconstruction, a process far more intricate and profound than any outward display could suggest. We've explored the silent suffering, the introverted path of healing. Now, let us delve into the subtle shifts, the quiet strengthening that occurs when the internal world, rather than external validation, becomes the true compass for recovery. This is where the wisdom of psychology truly shines, offering frameworks to understand the silent alchemy of transformation. Carl Jung, a titan of psychological thought, once posited that one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. This profound statement serves as a beacon for understanding the quiet, often arduous, work of soul healing. It's not about denying the pain or suppressing the shadows. It's about acknowledging them, integrating them, and understanding their place within the entirety of one's being. Consider the silent battles waged in the human psyche, the struggle with an ingrained sense of unworthiness, the subtle yet pervasive fear of abandonment, the echo of past criticisms that whisper insidious doubts into the present. These are not grand, dramatic conflicts visible to the world. They are the quiet, persistent undercurrents of the shadow self, demanding conscious engagement. Imagine a woman named Anya, a brilliant architect whose designs were celebrated for their innovative spirit, yet whose personal life was marked by a recurring pattern of self-sabotage in relationships. Each time a partnership reached a critical juncture, a quiet, almost imperceptible tremor of anxiety would seize her, leading her to create distance, to find flaws where none truly existed, or to simply vanish from the emotional landscape without a trace. Her friends, seeing her quiet withdrawal, would often exclaim, "Anya, you just need to talk about what you're feeling. Get it out." But what was there to get out when the pain was so amorphous, so deeply embedded in the bedrock of her being? It wasn't a singular event she could pinpoint. It was a pervasive sense of not being enough, a silent judgment passed upon herself long before anyone else had a chance. This quiet, internal struggle was, in Jungian terms, Anya's shadow at play. Her brilliant exterior, her public persona of competence and creativity, was carefully constructed, a bulwark against the deeply held belief in her own inadequacy. She had unconsciously projected this inadequacy onto potential partners, seeing their eventual withdrawal as proof of her inherent unlovability, rather than a reflection of her own internal mechanisms pushing them away. Her healing began not with a grand revelation or a dramatic confrontation, but with a quiet, almost reluctant acknowledgement of this shadow. She started observing her reactions, her sudden need for distance, her subtle criticisms of others, not as truths about them, but as projections of her own internal landscape. "Why do I feel this surge of anxiety right now?" she would ask herself. "What part of me is afraid of this closeness?" This was her quiet work of making the darkness conscious. Albert Bandura's concept of self-efficacy provides another crucial lens through which to view this silent strengthening. Self-efficacy isn't about bravado or outward boasts. It's the quiet, internal conviction in one's own ability to succeed in specific situations. Anya, despite her professional triumphs, had low self-efficacy in her intimate relationships. She believed, deep down, that she was incapable of sustaining healthy, fulfilling connections. Her initial attempts at engaging with her shadow were tentative, marked by moments of despair and doubt. "This is too hard," she would sometimes think. "I'm just wired this way." But each small act of conscious observation, each moment she chose to lean into the discomfort rather than retreat, subtly bolstered her internal sense of agency. She began to see that her patterns weren't immutable decrees but learned behaviors, capable of being unlearned and reshaped. This quiet, persistent effort, far from any public announcement, was the true forging of her self-efficacy in the arena of emotional intimacy. The insights of Carl Rogers on unconditional positive regard also offer a path to understanding this internal shift. While Rogers often spoke of the therapist providing this regard, Anya discovered the profound power of providing it to herself. In her quiet moments of introspection, she began to treat her own vulnerabilities, her own fears, not with judgment, but with a gentle, unwavering acceptance. Instead of condemning herself for her patterns, she started observing them with a detached curiosity, as if studying a complex, yet ultimately understandable, phenomenon. This feeling of panic, she would internally muse, "It's just a part of me that's afraid. It needs comfort, not criticism." This self-compassion, cultivated in the solitude of her own thoughts, was a revolutionary act. It was the silent dismantling of the harsh inner critic that had held her captive for so long. There was no need for external validation, no applause for this internal shift. The applause was the subtle lessening of anxiety, the quiet unfolding of a greater sense of peace. Her journey wasn't marked by a sudden, dramatic breakthrough, but by a series of small, internal victories. She started engaging in relationships with a newfound presence, not demanding perfection, but quietly observing her own emotional responses, choosing to stay present even when the familiar urge to withdraw arose. She had conversations that, while outwardly mundane, were internally profound, as she actively challenged her old patterns. She learned to communicate her anxieties, not as accusations, but as vulnerable expressions of her inner world. She discovered that true strength wasn't about suppressing emotion, but about acknowledging it, understanding its roots, and choosing a conscious response. This was the quiet rebellion against her own ingrained patterns, the silent forging of a new self. The soul, in its profound wisdom, had been healing not through grand pronouncements, but through a meticulous, internal excavation and reconstruction. Anya's story underscores the explorer archetype, a figure who ventures into the uncharted territories of their own psyche, seeking understanding and integration. Her narrative emphasizes that the most profound healing is often an introspective journey, a silent delving into the self that transcends the need for external validation or performative displays of recovery. Her character, defined by a quiet courage and a deep commitment to self-awareness, illustrates how emotional behavior can be reshaped from within, away from the clamor of societal expectations. You, perhaps, have also felt the pressure to be over it, to declare your healing complete, when internally, the work is still ongoing. Remember that your internal landscape is your most sacred space. Embrace the silence, for it is within the stillness that you can truly confront your shadows, cultivate self-efficacy, and offer yourself the unconditional positive regard you inherently deserve. The seeds of transformation are often sown in quiet, fertile ground. How might you begin to cultivate that stillness within your own life, allowing your soul to heal on its own terms? Today, more than ever, we live in a world that often conflates validation with volume, where the loudest voices seem to command the most attention. Yet, when it comes to the profound process of mending the spirit, the fundamental truth remains. The soul doesn't heal loudly. We've journeyed through the quiet sorrow and the introspective strengthening. Now, let us conclude by embracing the most potent aspect of this silent transformation, the quiet, yet powerful, rebirth that arises from letting go of the need for external validation, culminating in a peaceful, internal renaissance. This is where true empowerment truly takes root, often far from the public eye. William James, the father of American psychology, once asserted, "The greatest discovery of my generation is that a human being can alter his life by altering his attitudes." This seemingly simple truth holds immense power, especially when applied to the silent work of healing. It speaks not to dramatic external changes, but to the subtle, profound recalibration of one's inner world. The noise of the external world, with its judgments and expectations, can often drown out the delicate whisper of the soul's genuine needs. True healing isn't about proving anything to anyone else. It's about a quiet, unwavering commitment to one's own internal peace. Consider the story of Leo. For years, Leo had been a prisoner of external affirmation. His worth, in his own estimation, was inextricably linked to the applause of others. As a gifted artist, his canvases sang with vibrant colors and bold strokes, garnering critical acclaim. Yet, behind the public facade of success, Leo battled a gnawing emptiness. Every exhibition, every glowing review, brought a fleeting high, quickly followed by the dread of needing more. His relationships, too, mirrored this pattern. He sought partners who would validate his genius, who would reflect back an image of perfection, often at the expense of his own authenticity. When a particularly harsh critique landed, or a relationship soured, Leo would spiral into a quiet despair, convinced of his own inadequacy. "They don't see me," he would think, "I'm a fraud. If only they knew how truly empty I feel." This internal dialogue, though silent to the world, was a deafening roar within him, fueled by a lifelong pattern of seeking his self-worth outside himself. His turning point arrived not with a dramatic crisis, but with a quiet, almost imperceptible shift in his artistic process. He found himself increasingly drawn to his studio late at night, not to create for an audience, but simply to create. He began experimenting with new mediums, forms that held no commercial appeal, working on pieces that he knew would never be exhibited. These were not for show, they were for him. He started painting abstract landscapes that mirrored his internal emotional states, raw and unpolished. This was his individuation journey, a quiet declaration of independence from the collective unconscious that demanded public performance. He was no longer projecting his need for worth onto external sources. This was a profound act of shadow work, acknowledging the desperate need for external validation that had driven him, and quietly beginning to integrate it. He saw the anxious part of him that craved applause not as a weakness, but as a wounded aspect yearning for true recognition, which could only come from within. One morning, after an entire night spent on a sprawling, messy canvas that no one else would ever see, Leo felt a profound, unfamiliar peace. It wasn't the fleeting satisfaction of a successful exhibition opening. It was a deep, resonant calm. He looked at the painting, a chaotic swirl of blues and greens, and a quiet smile touched his lips. "This is mine," he thought, a sense of ownership that transcended any external judgment. This quiet breakthrough was reinforced by his foray into Stoicism. He began reading Marcus Aurelius, devouring the wisdom that true freedom lies in distinguishing between what is within one's control and what is not. The opinions of others, the whims of the market, the expectations of society, these were external, beyond his control. His internal state, his creative expression, his response to life's vicissitudes, these were entirely his own domain. This perspective, cultivated in the solitude of his mind, slowly began to dismantle the architecture of his external dependence. His relationships began to shift too. He stopped seeking partners who would complete him, and instead sought connections based on shared presence and mutual respect. He started communicating his authentic desires and boundaries, not loudly or aggressively, but with a quiet conviction born from self-knowledge. There were moments of discomfort, certainly, as some relationships couldn't accommodate his newfound authenticity and naturally fell away. Yet, even in these departures, there was no despair, only a quiet understanding. The universe, it seemed, was mirroring his internal transformation, shedding what no longer served his evolving self. He started walking in nature, not to escape, but to simply be present, observing the quiet rhythm of the earth. He practiced mindful breathing, bringing his attention back to his own body, anchoring himself in the present moment, releasing the constant mental chatter of what he should be doing or how he should be perceived. This was a quiet, relentless act of self-reparenting, nurturing the inner child who had always sought approval. The climax of Leo's quiet healing wasn't a dramatic unveiling, but an internal shedding, a letting go of the heavy cloak of external validation. He no longer needed the world to tell him he was worthy. He simply was. His canvases, though still vibrant, now radiated a different kind of energy, an authentic resonance that stemmed from a deep well of self-acceptance. The noise of societal expectations had faded into a distant hum, replaced by the profound, comforting silence of his own healed soul. His pain, once a loud, demanding entity, had become a quiet teacher, guiding him towards an inner sanctuary. Leo, embodying the archetype of the alchemist, transformed the lead of his external dependency into the gold of internal autonomy. His journey illustrates that the deepest healing is often a silent, internal process of disengagement from the clamor for external validation, leading to a serene and powerful inner rebirth. His character, marked by a gentle persistence and a profound commitment to self-discovery, reveals that genuine emotional well-being arises from cultivating an internal locus of control, a stoic acceptance of what is beyond our influence, and a fierce protection of our authentic self. You, too, possess this innate capacity for silent transformation. Perhaps you have felt the relentless pull to perform your healing, to articulate your pain for an audience. But remember, the most profound shifts occur in the quietude of your own being. Let go of the need for external applause, for public understanding of your deepest wounds. Embrace the power of stillness and meditate. Walk in nature. Engage in creative pursuits purely for your own joy. Journal your unspoken thoughts. Allow positive thoughts to gently dismantle negative ones. Each quiet act of self-care, each moment of introspection, is a step towards a powerful inner rebirth, a testament to the fact that your soul knows how to heal, profoundly and beautifully, without a single sound. This transformation, powered by your own internal strength, will not only alleviate the pain, but will also ignite a newfound excitement and faith in the unwavering power of your own spirit. If you find this narrative resonating with your own silent journey, if you see yourself reflected in these quiet battles and victories, please leave a like, subscribe, and comment to help our channel feel from you. And if you know someone who needs to hear this quiet truth, please send them this video as a necessary share. Thanks for watching. The end.